Today we're going to find out how the short-term rental market has evolved over the past couple of years.
Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. This is the podcast where we love to talk about the big things in property that never usually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent, co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia, and author of Auction Ready.
And I'm Chris Bates, mortgage broker. Before we get started, I need to let you know that nothing we say on here can be taken as personal advice. We always recommend you engage the services of a professional.
Don't forget that you can access the transcript for this episode on the website, as well as download our free full or forecaster report, Which Experts Can You Trust to Get It Right? theelephantintheroom.com.au.
And here to share his insights is a co-CEO and co-founder of MadeComfy, Quirin Schwaighofer. I've been practicing that pronunciation. Now, MadeComfy is a property management and hospitality company specialising in short-term rentals. Their headquarters are in Sydney with extended operations in Melbourne and Brisbane, and their core business is managing Airbnb rentals and thereby helping property investors improve their rental returns. Now, it's been about 4 years since we last spoke to Quirin, back in episode 21, if you can believe it. Thank you for coming back to update us today on what's been happening in the sector, Quirin. We're really happy to have this chat with you.
Thank you so much, Veronica and Chris. Really appreciate that. The first one was super fun. And I'm a big fan of your show as well. So
thank you.
Yeah, quite excited to get into it today.
Awesome, Quirin. 4 years, hey? What a change in the market, in the world, I guess, and the way that we move around the world. So, there's so much we can talk about in today's episodes, but what are some of how's your business gone, I guess? And how's it obviously it's growing really strongly and you've got lots of staff and things like that, but what's been some of the major challenges and how's it sort of going forward?
Yeah, where do I begin? When you look forward as in life, generally, personally, as a business owner or whoever, you don't see those kind of things happening, right? So when COVID happened, of course, it was first like this kind of thing that is somewhere in Asia. It was impacting travel a little bit, and then suddenly here we go, borders shut, and we're in lockdown. And you think about completely other things, right? You think about your health, you think about your family, you think about your staff, everyone, right? So it's really something you can't prepare yourself for, and it's something I think that will give you lessons for life going forward. And yeah, so overall, definitely severe impact in travel. We had before COVID, 55% of our guests were international. The rest was pretty much interstate. So you shut that, you could assume your business is gone. And I think being still here in a better shape than pre-COVID, I think says a lot what it really forced us to do as a business.
So how many roughly rentals have you got at the moment? Just so we can talk numbers.
Now we are getting close to 1,000 rentals.
Okay.
We've changed our business model a little bit as well. So it's no longer just that we are managing one-by-one rentals. We've adjusted and evolved a little bit during COVID, and
I think it'll be interesting because you've got 1,000, right? That's a good statistical number, I guess. And it'd be good to sort of see, what happened to your rental. What was happening to the people in COVID, right? So what percentage of people that were always doing short-term letting just said, you know what, we can make more money on the long-term market, what people just really kept on going through the whole process. And, even though there was less international, there was maybe more domestic. And where are you seeing demand for lots of new rentals, I guess? So what are you seeing?
The very first thing when this happened, it was about everyone's health, number one. It was about helping property owners. A lot sort of rushed back from all international, coming back to Australia. So occupying their own property, helping them with that. It was about financial returns, forecast, mortgages. There was so much stress in everyone's life about their own, like it's one of the biggest assets you have in your life is your property. And from a cash flow point of view, simple, just immense. So helping our owners, managing that, understanding the forecast, understanding what's going to happen was number one. And then, of course, you had a few owners, again, that needed to move in. We had others that simply were sort of paying mortgage month by month, and that just uncertainty really was really difficult. So we worked on finding long-term tenants for those. And that's sort of when we started our real estate agent partnership network quite extensively to really help our owners to just to have that cash flow. And then it was for us about looking at properties and accommodation was still needed, and we worked a lot with government, with hospitals, with construction companies to provide accommodation to those that have to travel. So we had a lot of nurses, a lot of doctors that sort of were coming from Queensland down to Victoria to Sydney when we had that first wave, for example. And everyone was gearing up for these kind of like literally tens of thousands of people in hospital, which thank God didn't happen. But that was sort of the very first bit where we were able to really pivot from focusing on growing by finding new properties, but finding guests and occupying our properties, assuming that worst case, Airbnb will fall over, booking accommodation, the wall will fall over at some point. That was the hypothesis that could happen. So preparing for that was how we really were able to keep property owners with MadeComfy. And it was the time when we launched our direct booking page within 3 months.
That's such a interesting sort of way to look at it as well, that you weren't just in survival mode for yourselves and for MadeComfy as a business. As a sector, everything's just on its head. Who knew what was going to happen next? And it's funny, even you just talking then, I was casting my mind back to that complete uncertainty and how JobKeeper came in, from a federal government point of view, and that certainly that gave me a sense of, well, thank God the government's got my back. And extended out to others. I would imagine your customers, your clients must have felt the same way. You're suddenly pivoted from trying to get more properties on your books to getting, bodies in beds, basically. And good for you as well as for them, but certainly it must have generated a different type of relationship between MadeComfy and your clients. Would that be fair to say? I mean, that's what I was picturing when you were saying that.
Yeah. I mean, what we sort of learned was all about communication. Information was, you could hear a lot and nothing, really, and fast-moving sort of changes. So what we really focus on is being super transparent, communicating opportunities, trends, ups and downs, really in an unfiltered way. So our property owners could make really an informed decision on, again, their cash flow. And being really focused on filling properties was good for us as a business, because we really got very close understanding how difficult is it really to fill if you're not relying on Airbnb. And we really realized that when we looked at occupancy rates of hotels, they were sort of in the 10-20% mark. Once they had their hotel quarantine, they got to the 20-25% mark, but that was really low. We were constantly above 50%. Of our occupancy. So it got us a really good feeling for property owners. How do we get keep certainty on finding at the end tenants, guests that are staying in the properties? And it really helped us to understand that going forward in a COVID impacted world, short-term rentals are by far better suited for the new traveler needs. You had change of behavior, like you had in the GFC, a change of user behavior. Those big events change user behavior and in a really fast way. And what it really meant is longer stays and more concerns about where do I stay, what privacy do I have, what amenities do I share, and what certainty do I have in regards of if I have to cancel and change my sort of term. So that's what we really identified, and we could we could focus on getting better on that for our property owners at the end.
Did you see that a lot of the people in things that naturally suited international, so maybe a lot of people who had apartments around the city, were the ones that got hit the hardest, rather than the ones that were maybe a house down the south coast or a bigger house in Brisbane, etc. It was the ones that really just suited the international traveller?
To be honest, with the hard lockdowns, it didn't matter where your property was. So it was literally look at Melbourne. It's really the time everyone was locked down, even those kind of houses, it didn't make a big difference. So globally, without the hard lockdowns, definitely the urban markets were more impacted because people really tried to avoid urban. You also had less, again, movement. So people drive to destinations, 2-3 hours from capital cities were going through the roof. And if you think about how many people came back to Australia with a lot of cash, with money that they usually spend on expensive overseas trips, doing things in drive-by destinations really created a huge demand on a global scale. So once the lockdowns ended in Australia, that definitely also really like pushed the trend forward. And I think this year, Easter, sort of also the holiday season, we saw a lot of traction in those drive-to locations, but also Australians moving around Melbournians, going to Sydney and simply visiting a city that is not rushed over by international tourists. So we saw a lot of domestic travel in those locations.
Has it highlighted though? I mean, are there still segments, so particularly that inner city market, for instance, there's still segments that are still suffering?
I wouldn't say suffering. We are out of suffering. Suffering was until November. And then since November, we are in average with our ADR, so a nightly rate and occupancy rate, we are where we were pre-COVID. Now we look at Canberra, for example, our Canberra properties, they are going on over 80% occupancy, simply because there's so much sort of travel movement. What we really see is that people think about where they travel. We sort of see that we can drive bookings. So MadeComfy Direct is now the second biggest booking supplier for our properties. Previously it was like almost zero. And now we got Airbnb, of course, but MadeComfy is generating more bookings than a Booking.com or HomeAway is, or Stays Verbo they're called now. So it really shows us that people are traveling, but they're thinking about where they travel, where they stay, and what is the best suited accommodation to that kind of traveling.
I would imagine that people always think about that. So how is what they're thinking about changing, or what were the priorities?
That's habit. Now you go, okay, we go. So two things: length of stay and habit. If you go somewhere for 1 or 2 nights, you go to a hotel. Like literally, if I travel, I stay somewhere one night, I don't even think about a short-term rental if I don't have a MadeComfy there. Right? With MadeComfy, I say MadeComfy, but otherwise, a hotel is just convenience. It is great. If I stay somewhere for a week, and where I now stay and want to go to is not necessarily the CBD, because not all offices are and places are on the CBD. I think about how can I stay as close as possible to my final destination, so I don't need to be like just moving around all the time. So I think about that. And then my habit about just going to, I don't know, like the previous hotel that I booked, I just think about what is there that makes me feel a bit better. So I'm not just in my studio bed where I need to work. Where do I have more space? And again, what happened over the last couple of years is that people really realize short-term rentals are no longer this kind of hobby couch surfing thing, but you can get a really nice, well-equipped, professional-run short-term rental where you can work. It is your sort of center for your trip. And if you work with friends, you can simply stay together. And you don't have the kind of awkward things working on a bed next to each other, like you're doing a thing, or you go to the lobby where it's everything noisy. So it's just really convenient thinking about that. And I'm not even going yet to the whole digital nomad part where like work from anywhere, remote working, what that really enables you to do from a travel point of view. But you need to have a place where you work, where you have silence, and when you can focus and concentrate.
Have you seen many guests that are doing that pure work from anywhere movement? I mean, Airbnb are getting a lot of credit for coming out with their policy, yesterday that you can work from anywhere. I mean, it was that if any company was going to offer it, they had to offer it. But, Google and Facebook and Apple and Atlassian. I mean, a lot of those are actually going back to you have to come to an office a certain amount of days per week. And or their incomes are going to get varied depending on if you switch cities more than 90 days and things like that. So what's your sort of take on what you're seeing in terms of the corporate? Because you're seeing the people who are getting that flexibility, who are hopping from Airbnb to Airbnb. Are you seeing much of that?
So I think there are two extremes. One is like always the office. The other one is like always hopping around in Airbnbs and MadeComfys. I think what we will see is kind of things may be more flexible. It is more easier to communicate and work if you're not on your desk. And with that, you get more flexibility for your life. And I think what happened, it takes about, many studies, 4 weeks, 30 days to break a habit. We had 4 months of lockdowns, so it was really good at breaking habits. And now other habits are coming back, right? Is it easier to remember when we met 4 years ago, we sat next to each other. It is a different feeling. We are still like herd animals in some kind of form. We will like social interaction. Now, what I think will happen is work can't just be work. If you have choice, of course, where you just go and you wait, you count the minutes to finish, it needs to add more value to your life and purpose to your life. So So it will drive companies to think about their employees, how to elevate them, how to drive them. You see, of course, those with big, high profitable, big funding that care about that do a lot of this kind of things. And that's all around also for us individuals about what is really important in life, our families, relationships. There was 2 years. I didn't see my parents in 2.5 years. I haven't seen my little daughter in 2.5 years. So it was really, really, you think about that, right? Like if this happens again, what is your priority? And I think all of this will somehow form a new way of working. Will it be never in the office back? No, I don't think so. It's really important. Here at MadeComfy, everyone is back 2-3 days, some are 5 days because I really love it. And yeah, others are more remote. So that's what I think will happen there. We'll see more people just being able to travel for 4 weeks, for example, and do a trip that you previously couldn't do, where you maybe have annual leave for 1 or 2 weeks and you stay for 4 weeks and you work 2 weeks. And we've seen a lot of that where people just stay longer and they say, well, I have my leisure and my work, I can combine it. And yeah, and it's great because you really get a bit of a for your family time out. And it's great if you have the choice of where you stay and you still are able to work.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people used to hang out for their long service leave, right? And wait there 7-10 years or whatever it is for a lot of companies. And then they get their 3 months off. But, I think sabbaticals are even something that we've seen clients, where clients don't want to lose their talent. They know they need a break. They're burning out. They want to go on this trip. So instead of resigning and then losing you, well, we'll give you 12 months off and you can come back after that. Have you noticed those sort of things in flexibility? Because with low unemployment, with global talent shortage, with not being able to import labor, the power's all with the employee at the moment, right? And the employees want flexibility because they've had the taste of it in the last few years.
Yeah. So I always say the grass is greener on the other side, right? So of course there's a shortage, but I think if you're a good employer, you have great jobs and you have a big purpose, you will always be able to access talent on that. So I think that's a very important bit. Like they taking the full year off. I think we haven't seen this here at MadeComfy. I think a lot of our team members were really keen to travel home. So we had this, okay, I'm away for 2 months, and I work from wherever I am. And we were able to accommodate that, and that was really, really helping. But that's the longest was around 2 months and then coming back. And then we have, of course, maternity leave. It allows a lot of more flexibility for parents to take maternity leave if you don't have to come back to the office, but you can simply be at home if you have some professional support, if you share that. It is giving a lot of more flexibility in those kind of situations, and that's where we maybe have seen it. But again, it all goes back to what is important in your life and how can you focus on that. And waiting for the long service leave, when I had my corporate job, I was waiting and counting for this. I didn't get there, but it would be nice to do these things before we reach a certain age, and sticking for a job just for the sake of it. I think that is something that whole shift and shortage of labor is enabling people not to having to wait for that.
So all this flexibility, it's a luxury really when you think about it, because obviously not everyone has that that ability in their working life. I think also I'm curious to know what type of person, has there been any change in the type of property owner that is likely to, put their property on the short-term rental market versus the type of property or the type of owner that would have done so pre-COVID? Has that changed? Because I would imagine pre-COVID, you got a lot of people that would have rented out a spare room, for instance, because obviously that helps them, particularly maybe first home buyers, might help them with cash flow. And certainly you mentioned people have gone overseas and obviously rented out their homes, short-term rental market while they're away. Then you've got people who just bought an apartment basically and wanted to maximise their yield on that. So there's lots of reasons, lots of compelling reasons, I guess, why people would choose that as a way to offer their property for to get income from it. Has that changed in any way, do you think?
Yeah,
has there been some weaknesses or any I guess vulnerabilities, any of those motivations?
Yeah, so we definitely have seen a change here. The biggest change is that was previously it was around a different form of income and looking at that, like we've never done the only room and management, but the biggest shift we've seen is really flexibility of use. So with that whole that we're all more mobile and flexible from where we work, is that we see people buying properties and living in that for some point, right? For some kind of, sometimes it's just like for a couple of weeks a year, for a month or two a year. But that is really something where we've seen that new, and you can't do long term in those kind of scenarios because that takes away that flexibility of use your property. And going back to the point is when I think with your sort of introduction on this, I think what we really see here is that we are enabling properties to be utilized in an area where there's shortage in a way that someone that then, let's say you own your property in Brisbane and you are in there for December and January, but not the rest. It allows others to stay in this property for their need. And again, that means it might take away some weight of the long-term rental market or from other accommodation. So I think there's really there is a change of user behavior, and I think short-term rentals are really enabling people with that kind of increased mobility and flexibility to where their center of life is and how maybe they don't have one center of life. Maybe you can have a couple of areas where you spend time, especially around families.
There's certainly been some legislation changes that were mooted for some period of time, and it's taken a while to get in. And I think in New South Wales, something like 180 days a year or something. So there's a bunch of limitations depending on where you are. And also there's individual strata buildings that would have specific regulations and restrictions as well. How is that all sort of unfolding? And I guess how do you sort of see the impact? Is it making a big difference? Does is 180 days too much, not enough? I mean, how does it all work?
Yeah. So if you ask me, it was time for legislation and regulation, and it is good, and it is an important part of setting standards and providing people with peace of mind and controlling areas that are having a negative impact. So I think that is an important bit. So there's actually been more than the things you mentioned. When I start with the Code of Conduct that was launched in New South Wales, there's also a Code of Conduct in Victoria. But that is a very powerful one. It is really setting expectations to an official with consequences, expectations to guests and property owners and those that manage those properties. And part of that Code of Conduct, you have as a guest about how you have to behave and act in a short-term rental. And if you don't follow those, there's a consequence. There are penalties, and you can be banned in a blacklist. And if you're blacklisted, you cannot book anymore on any kind of booking platform. And all booking platforms have to comply with that. So it really, when I look at that part, one of the biggest really issues this globally you have is around misbehavior. No matter if it's a short-term rental, a hotel, a long-term rental, is about having something in place. And that's, I think, really a lot of credit to New South Wales on how they've really done that. It also requires a safety floor plan. It requires a smoke detector. So it's a few things that are really good in further professionalizing this industry. So going to, for the manager and owner, of course, it's also around providing a response, providing an insured property. So there are a lot of things that give you peace of mind as a guest booking a short-term rental in New South Wales now. That's one bit. So I'm going back to the strata. So you can debate that. You cannot ban Airbnbs and stratas, by the way. That is false. If I want to rent out my room or my primary home of residence, there is no strata can ban it. It is illegal, like we can't. So the only way that strata can restrict short-term rentals is if it is not your primary residence, that 75% of the owners have to vote against it in the general meeting. And that again is also good if you have smaller blocks where you have mainly owner occupiers that live there, that say, look, we want to minimize the impact. If we have someone that says, does it fair enough, but we can minimize the impact. For those apartment complexes where you have mainly property investors, we don't see this kind of move because it would restrict you with a way of renting your property. Now, fair enough, currently it is really easier to get long-term rentals, but that can change again. And then you restrict yourself and you really diminish the value of your property too. So we don't see that happening a lot. And the other thing is any other bylaws where short-term rentals were restricted before that kind of launch, they are all invalid. So again, it just sets a couple of terms on the strata level. But important is, if I want to live in my place, I want to put an Airbnb for 8 months and I'm away, I can do that. If I want to rent out my room, I can do that without restriction.
I certainly get, the desire to have the maximum flexibility in terms of what you can do with your property. But when you said it actually diminishes the value if it's outlawed, what evidence do you have around that? Because the way my brain immediately goes is, right, well, hang on a minute. If I'm in a building that is predominantly investor owned, then I don't have a great capital growth asset anyway, because basically owner-occupiers are the people that actually push prices up, and you want one of those buildings with lots of owner-occupier appeal and a good balance of owner-occupier and investor. So I think instantly if you're in a building where people really want to basically have short-term rentals as in preference over long-term rentals, I'd be arguing that that's not a great investment from a capital growth point of view anyway. But I am curious. So that's the way my brain immediately goes. So I'm curious to know if you've got any evidence to support what you just said.
Yeah, I I can sort of turn this a little bit around. What evidence do you have that short-term rental properties are diminishing in value? You can't prove that either. I think there's the point of you cannot control in a building that the properties that are getting sold in the next 10 years, are they all going to be owner occupiers or are they all going to be investor properties? You have no impact on that. What I was saying before is, like, if it's owner occupier only, you cannot ban short-term rentals and Airbnb on that, and you can only do that if it is a secondary home. Not even the vote you can't.
Right.
Only if it's an investment property, you don't live in it, then the person can't do it. Now, to sort of argue that an open bylaw sort of drives everyone to do short-term rentals, I think that is a bit of an over-exaggeration as well. I've not seen that happening. It is literally about, as a property owner, having as many options that you have in certain market conditions, and again, that is sort of what you take away if you restrict yourself from that, rather than saying everything is now a short-term rental.
So if it is your house and you live there 6 months a year and you travel, 6 months a year, even if the strata doesn't want you to Airbnb it, your apartment, then you can still Airbnb it, even if there is a vote. But if it's a pure investment property, if 75% of the people in the block say, no, I don't want anyone Airbnb-ing this building, then who are investors, they can sign off on that. And that means that no investor can do short-term rentals.
No investor can do short-term. And exactly, that's going back to Veronica's point. If it's a building that's mainly owner-occupied, I understand that, right? But just to sort of...
And I guess the second thing, Veronica's point, my brain went sort of similar, right? But if you had an owner-occupier building and then they had a bylaw in there that said no one can do Airbnb, and I wanted to buy it as an owner-occupier and, have a family, I would see that as a positive, to be honest. I would see that, I'm not going to buy apartment 1 and then apartment 2 is going to have a constant flow. Now, there's always the risk that person lives in that property and they go on holidays, but I've also got the flexibility to rent mine on short-term lettings when I go overseas. So I think the rules are pretty fair. Do you agree with that?
If you like what you're hearing here, please share this episode with others you feel would benefit. And while you're at it, why not leave us an iTunes review? 5 stars, please. Every review helps make it easier for other people to find us and hear what our amazing guests have to say. We love hearing your questions and we're planning more listener Q&A episodes. Please send your questions in. You can send them via the website, which is theelephantintheroom.com.au, or directly via email to questions@theelephantintheroom.com.au.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And again, you can argue is in the future, in the city market, how many owner-occupiers are able to afford a property in Sydney? Very different topic on driving the prices up. So I have a bit of a belief here too around that the way, especially Sydney properties, are going to be used in the future. It's going to be very interesting. How many people are able to just buy a property and live in it?
And so what about like across the other limits? So you've got, I understand that limit there, but I mean the days limit, and where is it really severe, like places like Byron and Sunshine Coast, and where are you seeing real stress on the Airbnb market, and where your customers, for example, are having to close down their Airbnbs because it just no longer makes sense?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So it is important to understand that kind of law. So what it means, it's 180 days you can have your property booked and occupied with bookings that are less than 21 nights or days.
Got
so that means fair enough, it was really around restricting the sort of 1, 2, 3 nighters in a bit, and have some control of this. For us, about 30% of our bookings are over 21 nights in general, and we are looking at more avenues on this. That was part of our whole launch of the MadeComfy booking platform. It's been enabling insurance companies, enabling relocation companies, enabling. We work a lot with real estate agents when you renovate your property and you need a place for 1 or 2 months, being the go-to place where you simply then find accommodation that is consistent, insured, and so on, and you have the support. So from that point of view, when you think about we are running our properties on 70 to 80% occupancy, you have 180 days, which gives you 50%, and the remaining 25% we sort of need to fill with over 21 night booking or bookings longer than 21 nights. We've been already compliant before this whole thing started, simply because we look a lot at the mix of bookings, where you, for example, low season, you really want to have longer bookings to get that kind of occupancy. And what it did though, it makes it more difficult if you have less infrastructure technology in place to comply with this 100%. Have Airbnb hosts struggles with that? I don't know. Our customers have not, but that's maybe something you have to ask someone that did it. But again, it sort of reduces the stock on the market, which drives more opportunities for property owners.
Do you see, like, in terms of your pricing though, you're going to say, look, if you want to book for 20 days, it's $300 a night. But if you book for 23 days, which means we don't have to use our 180-day cap, it's only $250 a night, and it's actually cheaper for you to book more than 20 days. Do you see sort of people getting around the rules that way?
I just give them a free night, make it 21.
Well, that's sort of the thing, isn't it? You know.
I mean, like, if you have a few properties and you have a lot of spare time, you maybe wanna do that. I guess it's a little bit like if you go to the supermarket and you buy a whole pallet of mustard, you get a discount on that. And if you buy only 1 or 2, if you only need 1 or 2, you don't want the pallet, right? So it's a funny German movie, by the way, about someone buying a pallet of mustard because he saved 5%. So what I'm saying here is like, it was really important looking at who needs accommodation. There are more than those that just need a few nights, and there are those that really want a place for 1 or 2 months, 4 weeks or whatever that sort of is, and that is enabling MadeComfy to fill that. And it's not just something that we've seen in Sydney or in New South Wales. It is something that happens across the globe, where it's really sort of looking at accommodation that is more self-contained and flexible, but it's sort of on a monthly basis where you can stay. You don't have to sign up for 12 months. You can sign, again, looking at the more flexibility, you can stay here for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and so on. So that's a lot of effort that we will be putting into providing more flexibility in accommodation to, again, increase the utilization of properties rather than having them.
Is there any like councils though that specifically have been able to override the government sort of rules and say, look, in the Byron Shire or the Sunshine Coast, you cannot have any Airbnbs in this area because of? So is there any situations like that where they literally are not allowing Airbnbs or cutting the night usage even further?
So it depends on the state. So New South Wales, it's a state law that overrules council law. Byron Bay is also on the 180-day limitation, like a few other sort of spots. And that was only, I think, earlier this year that was made. You have a lot Sunshine Coast, when you mentioned Noosa. They have other restrictions. Mornington Peninsula is similar, where you need to have a license, so you need to apply for license. What they want to really understand is how many short-term rentals do we have in our location. With that comes also a requirement of the support you give. What they want to avoid is having, sort of, I'd say, kind of soulless properties that are rented out by someone that doesn't care and if there's an issue, there is no one to really deal with it. And that's sort of why they have those things in place.
But in those areas where you need to get a license, from my understanding, had a client trying to buy one, that potentially they're not issuing new licenses, as in we've hit a cap. We're only allowing 500 of these. And, you want a license to Airbnb, but no, we're all full. We can't do any more Airbnbs. Have you heard of any stories like that? Maybe not in New South Wales, but in other pockets?
No, where we operate, we don't have any caps on our licenses.
So you haven't heard of that happening somewhere like Noosa or anything like that? No?
No, not that I'm aware of. I'm not saying that I'm the legal expert fully on that, but we have no issues on getting licenses in Noosa, and we have had no issues in applying for it. So that's what I can tell you. I know in other locations, like when you look into Barcelona, into Amsterdam, you have a number of licenses, and getting additional licenses is a thing. The US also has a few locations where you see this a lot overseas, where you have a historical city where you cannot have new properties, and you want to really put a cap on something so you keep the balance right. And I think that's a positive thing.
I think, interestingly enough, certainly before COVID, there was a lot of people that were thinking that was their strategy, that I'm going to buy a property, that I can Airbnb and I'm going to get much higher rent, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the big things then would have been the risk of legislation, because it was much more Wild West, I guess, before this legislation came into play. Would you say that there are other potential headwinds out there for people entering into this sort of, or owners in this space? Because are there still some big gaps, things that could happen, do you think, that could actually curtail the freedom or flexibility of some owners to be able to offer their property for short-term rent?
I think if we learn one thing is over the last 2 years with COVID, which was happening in the Ukraine and so on, we cannot predict the future. Now, so the famous unknown unknowns, I think Winston Churchill or someone claimed this quote at some point. So there will always be, no matter what you do. But from what we know, in regards of where we operate, there's a lot of certainty on legislation. There's a lot of certainty now in regards of market demand in short-term rentals. It is one of the fastest growing travel markets in the world. It is increasing in professionalism. There is less where you have to think about. There is more sophistication and so on. Still, of course, there are challenges we have to all come with around lack of labor, lack of support, technology developments and things like that, where we can definitely improve our service from that regard. There's a lot more certainty now in the short-term rental market than maybe there was in the past.
Quirin, I mean, I know Airbnb fees are pretty tasty in terms of they've got a beautiful app that they're investing billions of dollars in, and I sometimes watch Airbnb's updates, and we go away a lot and use the app. But something that I do, and I'm not sure I'm not the only one, is that we'll figure out who's renting that property. It's not so much Airbnb, it's MadeComfy, it's Holidays Collection on the South Coast, for example. And if you go direct to them, you can rent the same property, usually 15% cheaper, for example. Have you seen that, there's really going to be, Airbnb have got a challenge where, lots of smaller companies are, I guess, leveraging their technology, and then people are just booking on their own databases?
It depends, right? Like if you look at hotels that list on Booking.com, on Hotel.com, they have direct bookings, and in my eyes, it is up to Airbnb, up to Booking.com to make sure there are reasons why guests should book through their platform, what value they add, and that is why they're there. They also need to add value to property owners to actually list their properties. So that's that problem they're solving. And then, for a guest, if you want to do a bit of a hunt around, nothing will restrict you. You have this opportunity, I think, on any kind of marketplace. Now you can do this. Can all list all of them: Airtasker, MadPost, Amazon. I think there's always a way to get around. Do you have the time and the passion to do that? Not everyone has, and again, then there are certain reasons why you would. But it definitely in everyone's interest to focus on what value they provide, and what sort of part of the value chain they are, that they add purpose. And if you don't, I think you have a bit of a problem. But I do see a lot of the value that, of course, Airbnb does add, wants to add, and further does, and so are the other platforms, and so is MadeComfy.
But does MadeComfy direct? I didn't even know you did that. But is that cheaper than if you book that same apartment on Airbnb?
That depends. So I'd say it depends. We do have some kind of similar price parity and so on, but it again depends because you get other benefits. What we really focus on, you get a little bit more flexibility because at the end we take your payment, we control the payment. Airbnb, we don't control that, so we can pass on that kind of flexibility. We also have potentially some other less fees around this. So it's about just passing on to the person that books what you have to charge, and it depends a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just like when you use Uber Eats. You're paying 20-30% in fees that the restaurant has to sort of, and they're not making much money anyway, and so you can just literally go on their website and book online. It's just it's the same price, if not, but the restaurant gets a lot more. I can see these sort of issues popping up with Airbnb when all they are is the platform in the middle. Yes, a beautiful one, but they're not so much delivering the product or the service like you guys are.
Yeah, I mean, like, they have a lot of engineers and I guess smart people thinking about that kind of challenge, as has domain realestate.com. I mean, like, there is a certain power you have as a global marketplace, and yeah, but I struggle to really answer this in a way of how this will go in terms of change. But I mean, for us, we really, when we talk about MadeComfy, it's around ensuring that we get the right guests for the properties and people recognize MadeComfy. And we really want you to book a MadeComfy. If you prefer Booking.com or Airbnb, do that, please. If you feel comfortable booking us directly, you can do that too. So we really want to enable those kind of scenarios and really have a solution for different guest segments. Is maybe a point. Airbnb is not appealing to all those kind of travelers out there that are traveling, like I said, the relocation agents. And so on.
Although it is interesting to see the speed at which the disruptors are getting disrupted. And certainly Netflix is under a bit of, Netflix disrupted the whole free-to-air and cable. Well, cable disrupted free-to-air, then Netflix disrupted cable. Now Netflix is getting disrupted. So, and that's all happened within sort of 10 years. And that's not really necessarily accelerated by COVID, where a lot of other disruptions are. So, it stands to reason that Airbnb will probably get disrupted by the next wave, I would think.
I think we're all getting disrupted all the time. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, I think in life, it never stands still, and it's about really being close to your customer, I think, is important.
Yeah.
Do you find that COVID, we talked earlier at the outset about COVID and the initial impact of that sort of bringing you closer to your customer, the customer that you have in terms of the owner, because you've got two customers, right? Has it brought you closer to the end user customer? Has there been a different interaction with them through that? I mean, I don't even know where this question is going, in the sense that I don't know what you're going to tell me, but I'd be curious to know also that you talk about the way in which they think about their destination differently. What other changes, I guess, is any of that permanent, other than the work from home thing? Is anything permanent?
Yeah. No, I think I think one thing that, and I tell you a quote that we had, Sabrina and I, we had it on our desk, we had it on the wall of the fridge, in the shower wall. It was this famous quote: "Is bad companies are destroyed by crisis, good companies survive it, great companies thrive by it." Now, we heard it so often now, but back in March 2020, that was really cool. And it was really this kind of motivating driver. So for us, it meant a lot around how do we actually solve the right problems and be close to, and you need, when you go back to before, you need to add purpose and value to your customer. So when we looked at that in our industry, we've got property owners, we've got guests, but it was all around when we knew guests are really keen to find some form of accommodation for maybe different needs. How do we increase our access to properties, and how do we again look at what a property owner wants. They want someone they trust, they know, and so on. And that was, and we've been working with them, when I talked about earlier about helping real estate agents, working with real estate agents to find long-term tenants. And we had sort of an early network here. What we really saw is like there is this huge opportunity going forward with on the short-term rental side around two things: adding this value to guests with a brand, so people that book a certain brand know what they get, and also for the property owner to have this kind of level of trust. Now, if you're in Maggi, for example, you might really prefer to have someone in Maggi that you know from your footy club, from birthday parties that manages your property, maybe even the one where you bought your property from, to manage your property, because they know your property and you know them and you trust them. So what we really did was looking at why are real estate agents not doing short-term rentals? That was the question that we really asked us: is why is MadeComfy actually able to do this? And looking into that was like, when we also asked agents, was they at the beginning it was like, it's weird, we go away, Airbnb, right? And then it became bit of a pain, and then it was like, shit, this is an opportunity here, right? I could, but I can't. Some really try to do shorter rentals, but then you have the complexities with tech, trust accounting, super complex when you have a guest every couple of days, weeks, rather than once a year, housekeeping coordination, distribution, revenue management, ID verification, payment taking. It is not something where, as an agency, you are focused on. And if you do it, you need to hire someone that's really good and hope that person never resigns. Which, again, when we looked about the great resignation, is maybe difficult to bank on that. So what we looked at and realized they want to do short-term rentals because it's a huge market opportunity that allows them to keep the client relationship. If an owner says, look, I bought the property off you, but I want to use it once or twice a year, sorry, I can't give it to you, right? You lose that relationship.
Yeah.
And what we really thought about, if we allow them to manage short-term rentals and enable them to do that, they keep that relationship, they keep the rent roll, but they don't have the hassle of tenant management. So in a nutshell, what we developed is a whole new platform that we are launching in a couple of weeks' time officially, which real estate agencies to add short-term rentals into their service portfolio, which all of those come with license, they come with a professional property understanding, they come with a knowledge of the market, and again allows them to enter a segment where they can really outcompete their sort of competitors. So if you are the expert in long and short-term rentals and owner use, you're in a great position.
And then beautiful for you for distribution, like.
Yeah, I mean, like for us, of course, what we we want properties, destinations for our guests that they can choose, right? So since then we've launched, we've got, and we're going to announce this officially. We've got several large brands that have signed up with us. We've got 25% of our portfolio is now with real estate agents, and it's the fastest growing segment that we have on our thing. Because what you'll see, and I'll tell you that, and we can talk again in 4 years' time. The next 2 years, there's a huge consolidation happening in the short-term rental world because of increasing legislation, increasing complexities, cash flow issues of the smaller players. The last 2 years have been really tough, mentally and financially. And you will see a consolidation in some form. And there are the Casas over there that are just buying companies. But what we really want is we want to enable those local businesses in the Maggi's Bateman space, in the Maldives Peninsula, to simply grow and keep that in there rather than having an international player coming there and doing short-term rentals.
Well, they'd also be suffering too, wouldn't they? Because there's a rental crisis, as we've, it's very well publicised that in a lot of these regional areas there's a massive shortage of rental stock, and a lot of people have sold their properties, and there's a lot going to Airbnb, to short-term rentals. So from a business point of view, that's a great opportunity for them to actually start to make up for some shortfall, I would imagine.
I'd say two things. We see a lot of construction in those locations. It enables, and we've seen a few of our partners getting comfortable with certain projects to build, because you have, again, a broader use of a property. So I'd say allowing those kind of communities and those businesses in those local communities that they know the issues of the market, they know the challenges, the opportunities, best, better than you, better than me, and enabling them to do what they think is best for them, for their community, I think is a very powerful thing to do. And providing, talking about Amaji and other locations, enabling them to have more property owners invest in those locations to build properties, I think is a positive thing, and driving more business to those regions. So I think we will see a lot more in there. But again, what our really value add here is empowering those real estate agencies in any location to do short-term rentals, to give them competitive advantage, and of course for those that want to travel, no matter if it's a week or a couple of months, to have options in as many locations as possible.
Quirin, I wouldn't mind getting your thoughts on the numbers. So we get clients, there's even one last week that I remember, we're going to Airbnb it, we're going to make a killing on short-term rentals. And I think it's probably level one thinking, we will get $600 a night or $600 a weekend. And then you've got to factor in the weekends that you're not going to get used, and will it get used during the week? And then the cleaning costs and the Airbnb fees and the management fees, etc. So what's sort of the formula? Do you roughly go through with clients on a high level to sort of help them think through and go, well, this isn't really going to make much sense. You would actually, and you're not even going to use, when you want to use it, other people, that's going to be your high season and it's when you're going to be best to rent it. So how do you take clients through that process to figure out whether they should Airbnb or not?
Yeah, I think there are two things, and I think we are maybe one of the ones that are turning down a lot of properties. If we don't think we can serve the purpose of your property, which is either the flexibility or the returns, then we will not do that. The same, of course, if your property is not set up in the condition that it needs to be a MadeComfy property, we also don't proceed. And the way we do that is when you go on our website, madecomfy.com.au, you sort of enter your details in our calculator. That gives you a rough laying estimate of what it could be. But what it then does is really sort of invites you to a proper proposal, which our team will do for you. That proposal will look into similar properties that we have in that location, how they're priced over the next 12 months, and what occupancy rates we are expecting based on our data. And we also look into the past 12 months of pretty much any short-term rental that is around you, and we have that data to come up with some expected guidelines. So you will get a monthly breakdown of cash flow, and you will also get some kind of guidance on what the nightly rates are and what the occupancy rates are. So at the end, for you to make a decision, is this something that fulfills my purpose? If it is to again, flexibility, it's really understanding the cash flow. If it is an alternative to long term, again, understanding what that means for you. But again, it's about providing the right information to property owners to make that decision from an educated basis, rather than these things we hear about. You make a killing, you make like $1,000 a night, you make double or anything. I mean, like that is all hearsay on that. Going back to the whole point, why professionalizing this industry is a really good thing is so these things stop, because it's not really the truth. What is
and what's interesting there is that you've set benchmark or barriers to entry in your business, because obviously you've determined what ingredients of success you need, right? So it's like certain properties are going to struggle, or you're going to get crap guests, and they're going to Yahoo, and they're going to annoy the neighbours, and they're going to do all those things that and then you're going to get bad reviews, and it's just going to be a nightmare. So there's a certain level of upkeep and attention, isn't there?
Yeah, of course. So you want to understand what drives a certain property. So when we look at the property, we look at the persona of guests that property will attract. That's one thing, and that depends on where it is, the size, the condition, and everything. If it's totally run down and really poor, you might really do okay getting an okay long-term tenant in, but we will really struggle to get good tenants in because nightly rate will go so cheap. It's just not helping anyone. So that's one thing. The one thing is when a property is the right location, the right type. What we've launched earlier this year is one of the most sophisticated guest vetting ID verification systems that you'll find. What we use is basic stuff. We ask for the ID selfie, of course. We also know the IP address of the guest when they're booked. We compare that IP address, how far away it is from the place of booking. If you book on a Friday night for 1 or 2 nights, you can't do one night with MadeComfy. 2 nights you can. A big house, and you're within 30 kilometers, for example, or 50, it gets a red flag. That means it is rejected, you can't book it, or it gets flagged by our team and we look at that. The same thing if you use a VPN, it is a yellow flag. If your email address is generated within the last not older than a certain period, and I can't say these things 100%, then it gets flagged. And all of that is really to avoid guests that are, of course, wrong intention and simply criminals. You want to ensure that you have this kind of vetting in place. But that's something we do on top of, and it's more sophisticated than what Airbnb has in place.
Wow.
So, I mean, what's
Airbnb, you can book with an email address only.
So with rents going up, Quirin, in certain areas, and a lot of the country rents are going up, and Airbnbs, for example, what sort of percentage over what they would get on the long-term market do you think a lot of people are looking for? Is it like 30% more than what they would get on the long-term market for them to go, it's worth going through all that effort and that risk, I guess? Or is it sort of, do you find it's a lot lower than that when people are willing to come on board?
That totally depends. So there is no, and that's why I sort of said what MadeComfy is not here sort of saying we will double your income, we will increase it by 30-50%. That's what others do. They do that simply to catch people's interest. And that will do your proposal. It will be simply depending on your property, the condition of your property. And it really depends. Sometimes it is the return, and it might be 10%, 20%, 30%. It really depends. Sometimes you're on a location where it's just not for the kind of property you have. Long term is not what you can do to finance that property, right? So if you have a bit of a sort of certain, again, upper class property in a certain regional location, you just can't get it, right? So, and again, for a property investor or owner, you want to have alternatives to finance your property. And I think sometimes we sort of see property owners framed in a very greedy way, and it's kind of cold and sort of faceless. No, they're not. They when I look at our customer base, there are a lot of smart investors in there, of course, but I do not see those kind of soulless investors. And I can say this really because when I look at COVID, how many guests we had really, really, really tough situation around mental problems, around suicide in the families where owners were incredible. And I think that's where I was getting a little bit emotional, because it is really, really something you don't hear. This kind
saying that
support
some of your owners provide accommodation at discounted or free, or
they would even waive it.
Yeah,
so they would even waive it in half situations. And again, this is not. It is not saying that we for free and I can do it, but there is a heart, right? And there is, when we look about the whole community that we sort of during COVID, we all got a little bit closer together to help each other. That is really not talked about, and it is just something where I'm really, really advocating for, because it is, and I think especially in Australia, why I love to be here in Australia, there's something, this kind of camaraderie, this mateship. You see this with guests, with property owners, vice versa, and I think that's sort of going back to the whole thing: legislation, code of conduct, all of that, professionalizing that. It is important that you're enabling the right behavior that is required, because at the end, we all we went through COVID, all of us together. We went through tough lockdowns, all of us together, and I think whatever now is the market, whoever will win the election, we will again live here together. And I think no one here is trying to do other things than being a good human, I think.
So, Quirin, I've got 2 questions to finish up on. The first question: if you're saying to someone who's coming to you and they haven't bought an Airbnb, what are some of the tips you say? Look, these are sort of the attributes. What's like do you always look for a sort of secret sauce, something special about the property versus the other properties in an area? What are some of the things you really think Airbnbs, should look for when they if they're wanting to go down this sort of longer term, short term rental?
Yeah, great. So think about. I think start that process early. We have a lot of owners that ask us, where should I buy and what should I buy? So I think that getting some advice early sort of helps. And you can do this anyway. You don't have to come to MadeComfy. You can get so much advice on there these days. But it's around understanding your guest profile, who will likely book you. I think that's very important. And that really differs. If you have a 4-bedroom house in the Southern Highlands, that's different to an apartment in Melbourne CBD. And once you understand that, the amenities and the needs that this guest type wants, and then you really look into what is there. If there are a few amenities that make it difficult, so if everybody has a pool in Southern Highlands, you don't have a pool, maybe this is a must amenity. And then you have some nice to have amenities. Like I was asked the other day, is how many of our properties have a Tesla charging station? It's like, oh, that's interesting. So in 10 years' time, maybe we need those kind of amenities for shorter rentals potentially. I don't know. So there are certain amenities that are must-have, and then are nice to have. Nice to have is a view, and must-have is what your competitors sort of have. So doing this kind of research, you can do this. You can go on Airbnb, for example, as well, to get some information on other properties at your location. I think is very important. Understand what features you have. It's always important to really have a well-maintained property for the sake of everything, for reviews, for cost of running it. And of course, going back to your whole other bit is like, what is the location? Is it in a block where you have a lot of owner occupiers? And if your intention is to do Airbnb, again, inform yourself about what your neighborhood is like, your community is like, is important as well, because you will sort of be part of that when you buy there. So these are maybe the important parts, and then really see what is the motivation for you, how important is return for you, certain times, consistency, how do you manage it,
Yeah, I mean, so the second question I'm sure is onto that is the other end of the scale, I guess. Have you got a Dumbo of the week for us that a lesson our listeners can learn from?
I think the Dumbo of the week, I mentioned it a little bit before, Airbnb investors do this only for the money. Saying it before, it is for having flexibilities with your properties, and flexibility in your life. Not everyone is a heartless investor.
And flexibility on sale as well, right? Like if you've got a long-term tenant and they're on a 12-month lease and your plan changes and you want to just quickly sell it, then you've got to wait for maybe the tenancy to finish so you can style it and so you can get it on the market. But if it's on an Airbnb, then it's like it's empty. I guess you might already be styled and furnished to sell it. But that's sometimes really important to investors, just to have that flexibility, the ease of sale, and maybe a rolling long-term contract is more risky. So there's always other motivations, I guess, rather than the exact dollar. But I think the key learning for and we've done this before, sending clients to yourself, Quirin, is that you do this on a property per basis, right? Some properties are going to have a very high, very low vacancy rate. You're going to be able to charge a premium most time of the year, and even a huge premium in holiday seasons. And those numbers are going to massively dwarf, long-term rentals, even when you take into consideration all the fees and things like that. And other properties are going to be the other story, right? Maybe it's just better just to go long-term rental. So, it'd be interesting if you are even considering a property, send it to the MadeComfy team and actually get that sort of analysis before you fall for the dream. And you think you're going to make a lot more money on it through Airbnb. And we'd also, Veronica and I are always on the same page with this stuff anyway. I mean, we only see that as the bonus. We had a client a few years ago just north of Central Coast, or in Central Coast. And, we thought, well, that property is going to be amazing on Airbnb. It's at such a location. You would love to rent that as a family or a group of families, but it's also commutable. And if you were leaving Sydney, you'd move there as a family. That property's probably gone up over 150% in 4 years in terms of its capital value, maybe even tripled. So it's in terms of price. And they make a killing on Airbnb, absolute killing, because it's so unique and it's just on photos, it just looks so sexy, I guess. And so you've got to go for the capital growth with the Airbnb income rather than just going for the Airbnb and forgetting that that's not the whole picture here. So thanks so much for coming on, Quirin, and good luck for the next 4 years.
Thank you so much. It was fun as always, and I love what you guys do. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Quirin.
If you're looking to buy your dream home or an investment property in Sydney's inner west, eastern suburbs or North Shore, my team and I can help you buy without regrets. Reach out via my website, gooddeeds.com.au.
If you're looking to buy your first home, thinking of upgrading into a new one, or purchasing an investment property anywhere in Australia, my team love to carefully guide you on this journey. And most importantly, get the finance right. Reach out via our website, wealthful.com.au.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love to see you again.
And remember, don't be a Dumbo.